You won't believe what happened when a highly respected black doctor was pulled over by police officers who saw only the color of his skin, not the credentials behind his name. This story will shake you, challenge you, and leave you questioning the very systems that claim to serve justice. But by the end of it, you'll see that no matter how powerful someone thinks they are, truth has a way of turning the tables, and sometimes justice doesn't knock, it kicks the door down. Dr. Elijah Brooks had just finished a 36-hour shift at the hospital. He was a trauma surgeon, one of the youngest to ever hold such a title at Rivergate General Hospital. At just 34 years old, Elijah had worked his way through med school with scholarships, side jobs, and sleepless nights. He came from nothing, the youngest of 5 in a single-parent household, raised in the roughest part of East Camden. His mother used to say, "Make them see your mind before they judge your skin." And he had done just that, until the night 2 officers decided that none of it mattered. It was 2:17 a.m. The streets were quiet, except for the occasional car or late-night pedestrian. Elijah drove his matte black Mercedes, a well-earned reward for his tireless years of dedication, toward his apartment in the upscale part of town. As he turned onto Maple Avenue, he noticed the headlights of a patrol car pull behind him. He didn't think anything of it, until the sirens blared. He pulled over calmly even though his body tensed. He'd heard stories, read articles, treated victims, but never imagined tonight would be his turn. 2 officers stepped out. One tall, built like a linebacker with sharp features and a perpetual scowl. The other younger but with the same edge in his eyes. "Step out of the vehicle," the older one barked. Elijah blinked. "Officer, may I ask what this is about?" "I set out." "Now," the younger one shouted, hand on his weapon. Elijah complied slowly, both hands visible. "I'm Dr. Elijah Brooks. I just left the hospital. I have ID if you'll allow me." "This car doesn't look like something you'd own," the older cop said, circling the vehicle. Plates came up suspicious. "Suspicious?" Elijah asked, still calm but confused. "It's registered in my name. I have the papers inside." But they weren't listening. They were circling him now, one yelling about smelling marijuana, which Elijah found absurd. He hadn't smoked a day in his life. Then came the moment he'd feared his whole life. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." "Officer, please, there's been a mistake. I'm a doctor. My badge, my credentials are right." But before he could finish, his face was pushed against the hood, and he felt cold steel snap around his wrists. "You people think you're untouchable," one officer muttered. Elijah was stunned, breath caught in his throat. Not once had he raised his voice, resisted, or even flinched. But here he was, arrested on the street he paid taxes to live on for driving the car he worked 15 years to afford. As they shoved him into the back of the cruiser, he caught a glimpse of himself in the rearview mirror. Blood on his lip. Eyes wide with disbelief. This couldn't be happening. At the precinct, things got worse. He was fingerprinted, photographed, and tossed into a holding cell with people who'd actually committed crimes. He explained to the arresting officer again who he was. Offered to show his credentials. Even offered to call the chief of surgery at Rivergate. They laughed. "A doctor, huh? That's a new one." 6 hours later, a weary public defender, clearly overworked and half-listening, told him he'd likely be released on bail but could be facing charges for resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, and suspicion of stolen property. "But it's my car," Elijah exclaimed. "I've got proof, documents, insurance, everything." The public defender shrugged. "Tell it to the judge." And that's when the real story began. Word of Elijah's arrest spread fast. His hospital was shocked. His neighbors were stunned. But the police department? Silent. No comment. No body cam footage released. No acknowledgement. The arresting officers even doubled down in their statement, claiming Elijah had been aggressive and uncooperative. But one person wasn't buying it, Judge Marilyn Tate. Known as the Iron Gavel, she didn't tolerate nonsense from anyone, cops included. And she'd seen too many cases like this to let it slide through without digging deeper. The day of Elijah's first hearing, the courtroom was packed. Reporters, protesters, even hospital staff who'd taken time off to support him. Elijah stood tall, even in the borrowed suit, his eyes scanning the crowd until they met those of his mother, tears brimming, jaw clenched in rage and sorrow. The prosecuting attorney laid out the case as if it were open and shut. The defendant was found driving a suspicious vehicle, failed to provide documentation, and resisted arrest when questioned. Judge Tate leaned forward. Did the officers retrieve any documents from the vehicle? They claimed the defendant refused access. Defendant? She said, turning to Elijah. Dr. Brooks, what is your version? Elijah stepped forward. Voice clear. Come. No anger, just facts. Your Honor, I identified myself as a doctor. I offered my license, my badge, my registration. They refused to check. Instead, they tackled me and arrested me without probable cause. She raised an eyebrow. You have these documents? Yes, Your Honor. I submitted copies through my attorney. She looked through the file. Mercedes registration. Hospital ID. Surgical certification. State medical license. Clean record. All matching. The courtroom began to murmur. And then came the twist. Judge Tate asked the officers, now sitting smugly, to approach. Where is the body cam footage? She asked. Ma'am, there was a malfunction. Both of you? Same night. Yes, Your Honor. Glitch in the system. Convenient, she said coldly. So let me get this straight. A board-certified trauma surgeon with no prior record, matching identification, is arrested because his car looked suspicious, and neither of your cameras were working. They shifted, visibly uncomfortable. The judge wasn't done. Do you know what probable cause means, officer? Yes, Your Honor. Then explain how you established it. Silence. The room felt like it had stopped breathing. Finally, one officer said, he didn't look like he belonged in that neighborhood. The words echoed like a gunshot. Gasps, murmurs, a few audible curses from the back. Judge Tate's expression hardened. You mean, because he's black? No, ma'am, I didn't mean. You said what you meant. She slammed her gavel once. This case just changed. What followed was a media storm. Civil rights groups got involved. The hospital issued a statement defending Elijah. Social media exploded. And while the trial date was being set, Judge Tate ordered an internal investigation into the two officers. But there was one thing no one expected. One of the officers, the younger one, Officer Langley, cracked. Weeks before the trial, he requested a private meeting with the court. He couldn't sleep. Said he'd joined the force to protect people, not hurt them. He admitted the arrest had been baseless. That Elijah had never resisted. That his partner had insisted they teach him a lesson. Judge Tate asked, why are you telling us now? Because I can't keep lying. He didn't deserve that. He didn't deserve any of it. And just like that, the entire case shifted again. Officer Langley agreed to testify against his partner, Officer Briggs. Suddenly, what started as a single act of racial profiling was being exposed as part of a larger pattern. Multiple cases, all involving Officer Briggs, all eerily similar. Elijah's story wasn't an isolated incident. It was the tip of an iceberg. When the day of the trial finally arrived, the world was watching. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the aisles. Activists and lawyers filled every bench. Elijah Brooks sat beside his attorney, calm on the outside but boiling within. He wasn't just fighting for his name anymore. He was standing in that courtroom for every black man who'd ever been handcuffed without cause, humiliated without reason, and silenced without apology. Officer Briggs sat across from him, arms folded, eyes narrow, surrounded by his union reps and legal team. He looked confident, smug even, until the bailiff called out, all rise. Judge Marilyn Tate entered, her expression unreadable, but everyone in the room knew she was about to make history. She began by stating what had brought them here. A respected trauma surgeon arrested outside his home, accused of stealing his own car without evidence, without a working body cam, and worst of all, without a reason beyond the color of his skin. The prosecution tried to spin the same tired narrative. That the area had experienced vehicle thefts. That Elijah fit a description. That the officers were just doing their jobs. But when Officer Langley took the stand, everything changed. He looked nervous at first, cleared his throat, glanced briefly at Officer Briggs, then spoke. We were driving through the neighborhood. Saw the Mercedes. My partner, Officer Briggs, said it looked out of place. Did he explain why? The defense attorney asked. No. He just said the guy looked like he didn't belong. Did Dr. Brooks resist arrest? No, sir. He was calm, respectful, told us who he was, even offered to show ID. And what did you do? Langley's voice faltered, but he continued. We didn't listen. Briggs pushed him against the car and cuffed him. I didn't stop him. I should have. Was there any marijuana? Any reason to suspect stolen property? None. The car wasn't stolen. The plates matched. He had keys in his hand. The courtroom erupted. Murmurs, gasps, anger, relief. Judge Tate banged her gavel for silence, but she was clearly moved. Thank you for your honesty, she said, her voice softer than usual. It takes courage to tell the truth in a room like this. Officer Briggs refused to testify. His lawyer claimed the entire arrest was legal, that Langley was just trying to save his own skin. But then something no one expected happened. Elijah's lawyer stood and introduced a surprise piece of evidence: hospital surveillance footage. A camera mounted just outside the ER had captured Elijah walking out of the hospital, getting into his Mercedes and driving off, time-stamped, dated, showing him in full scrubs, stethoscope in hand. Judge Tate leaned forward, eyes narrowing. So at the exact moment he was supposedly acting suspicious, Dr. Brooks was walking calmly to his car after saving lives? Yes, Your Honor. Play the clip. The footage rolled. Silence. Not a word in the courtroom. Just Elijah, tired but dignified, walking like any professional after a long shift, unlocking his car and driving off into the night. That clip destroyed the prosecution's last defense. But the trial wasn't over. Judge Tate wanted more than just acquittal, she wanted accountability. This case is no longer just about one man's arrest, she said. It's about a system that allowed it to happen. Over the next week, a wave of testimonies followed. A black teenager who had been stopped and frisked by Briggs for looking suspicious. A middle-aged black woman who'd been pulled over for driving too slow. A college student whose backpack was searched without a warrant. The pattern was undeniable. Officer Briggs had used his badge not to protect, but to profile. And the department had looked the other way. Until now. Judge Tate issued a formal rebuke to the department, calling for an immediate federal review of all cases tied to Briggs. She demanded disciplinary action not only against him but against supervisors who failed to hold him accountable. Briggs was arrested in that very courtroom, for falsifying police reports, perjury and violation of civil rights under color of law. As the bailiff escorted him out in handcuffs, Elijah stared at him. Not with hatred, but with quiet resolve. Justice wasn't revenge. It was truth, uncovered, undeniable and unstoppable. But even after the verdict, Elijah wasn't done. He could have walked away. He could have celebrated and gone back to saving lives. But he had seen too much, felt too much. And he knew others wouldn't be as lucky to have a judge like Tate or a lawyer willing to dig deep. So he stood in front of the cameras outside the courthouse and made an announcement that stunned the world. I'm filing a civil lawsuit not just for myself, but to establish a fund for victims of police misconduct. We're going to pay for lawyers, for counselors, for court fees, for dignity. I'm a doctor, yes, but now I'm also an advocate. Because nobody should have to beg to be believed. The video went viral. Donations flooded in. Celebrities, politicians, athletes, people from every walk of life, threw their support behind Dr. Elijah Brooks. The hospital reinstated him with an official apology. He returned to the operating room a hero. But something had changed in him. He started speaking at colleges, police academies, town halls. He wasn't just saving bodies anymore, he was saving hope. Years later, that fund he started? It became a national nonprofit. Thousands of families received help. Laws were passed. Policies changed. And Elijah Brooks became a symbol of resilience in the face of racism. But there's one more twist to this story. One more thread that hasn't been pulled. Because while Briggs was arrested and Langley came clean, someone else had quietly slipped through the cracks. A high-ranking police captain who had signed off on dozens of Briggs reports without question. Who had buried complaints. And now rumors were swirling. New evidence had surfaced. Evidence that could bring down the entire chain of command. And at the center of it all? A sealed document. With one name. One signature. One secret that could blow the case wide open again. They thought it was over. That the courtroom victory, the public apology, the arrest of Officer Briggs was the end of the story. But Dr. Elijah Brooks knew better. Real change never comes with a single trial. You don't just remove a weed by cutting the stem, you pull out the roots. And somewhere in that system, hiding behind badges and polished boots, was a root that had poisoned everything. The sealed document Judge Tate referenced? Elijah's lawyer got it unsealed with a court order. And when they opened it, jaws dropped. It was a memo, filed 5 months before Elijah's arrest, stating that Officer Briggs was under internal investigation for racially biased conduct, signed by Captain Richard Forrester. But instead of suspension, Forrester had reassigned Briggs to a new district, Elijah's neighborhood. Not only had the department known about Briggs' record, they'd quietly moved him from one black community to another like he was a faulty piece of furniture instead of a threat with a gun and a badge. Elijah's hands trembled as he held the paper. "They knew," he whispered. "They knew and did nothing." His attorney nodded. "Worse. They enabled it." Captain Forrester was well respected, seen as a progressive voice in the department. He gave press statements about equity, sat on diversity panels, even visited schools to promote unity. But behind closed doors he'd silenced whistleblowers, deleted complaints and buried evidence. The deeper Elijah and his team dug, the worse it got. Dozens of complaints had been resolved with no action. Internal affairs emails showed Forrester calling victims whiners and career complainers. But the nail in the coffin was a video. It had been anonymously leaked, grainy, time-stamped late at night in the precinct parking lot. It showed Captain Forrester laughing with Briggs and saying, "Don't worry about those complaint forms. You're doing God's work, man. They're all just looking for a payday." That video was the match. Elijah was the spark. And the city? It was the powder keg. News stations played the clip on repeat. Activists stormed City Hall. The mayor was forced to act. Within 48 hours, Captain Forrester was suspended. Within a week he was indicted. Elijah was asked to testify again, this time before a grand jury. And this time he wasn't just speaking for himself. He was speaking for every name on those complaint forms. Every voice that had been dismissed. Every family that had been silenced. "The system didn't fail," he said, standing in the courtroom, voice steady. "It functioned exactly as it was designed. To protect itself. To shield its own. That's why we're not just demanding justice. We're demanding transformation." The grand jury handed down multiple indictments. Obstruction of justice, falsification of records, civil rights violations. Captain Forrester was arrested. But this time there was no smug look on his face. No lawyers spinning narratives. Just a man caught by his own lies, shackled by the very system he once controlled. And yet Elijah still didn't feel peace. Not yet. Because there were still people hurting. Still lives broken. That's when he got an idea. One that would shift the ground under the city forever. He reached out to the families of other victims. Formed a coalition. Used the money from his foundation to hire legal teams, not just for defense but for offense. Civil suits were filed against the department. Community forums were held. Policy changes were demanded. Elijah stood at the front of every rally, not as a celebrity but as a survivor. "You don't have to wear a robe to deliver justice," he told the crowd. "You don't have to be a cop to protect your people. All you need is truth, and the courage to speak it." 1 year later, the department was forced to implement sweeping reforms. Mandatory body cams, independent civilian oversight, racial bias training from external experts, not insiders. And then, something happened no one expected. A new police chief was appointed. A black woman named Celeste Monroe. The first in the city's history. At her swearing in, she said, "This badge will no longer be used as a shield against accountability. We are not above the law, we are servants of it." And I thank Dr. Elijah Brooks for forcing us to look in the mirror. But the most powerful moment came months later, when Elijah was invited back to the hospital where it all began. The place where he'd been fired, humiliated, called a threat, simply for being a black man in a luxury car. This time he wasn't there to clock in. He was there to cut the ribbon on a brand new trauma center, named after him. The Dr. Elijah Brooks Center for Justice and Medicine. Inside it wasn't just an ER. It had counseling rooms, legal aid services, and job training programs for at-risk youth. A true sanctuary. A place where healing meant more than stitches and surgeries, it meant dignity. As Elijah walked through the halls, he passed a young black boy in scrubs, maybe 15. The boy stared at him starstruck. "You're him?" he whispered. Elijah smiled. "No, son. You're him. I'm just the first version." And that was the victory no courtroom could deliver. The shift no judge could order. Because in the end, Elijah didn't just clear his name. He created a legacy. He took the worst day of his life and used it to rewrite the rules for everyone else. And for every person who had ever been falsely accused, wrongly arrested, or told they didn't belong, his story was proof that they were never the problem. The system was. But not anymore. Not on Elijah's watch. Because some stories end with justice. But the best ones spark a revolution.